Well, good evening, everybody. Come on, you guys can do better than that. Just like 300 people in the room. Good evening, everybody. All right, thank you, thank you. My name is Ken Striplin. I am the city manager for the City of Santa Clarita, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this event tonight. And I really want to take a moment to say thank you for coming. And I tell you, this is about the third or fourth time that I've been here. The last 3 years I've moderated. And I'll tell you, this is probably the largest turnout that I've seen, and certainly the largest turnout that I've seen with as many young people. So I applaud you all for coming, both the youth as well as the parents. This evening actually marks the 5th year in a row that the city has hosted a symposium to raise awareness about the harmful effects of drugs, which certainly have a direct impact on the families here in Santa Clarita. For the past 4 years, these symposiums have focused mainly on heroin and prescription drugs. Because of that, because for a number of years we had a startling number of overdoses from those drugs. Indeed, heroin and prescription pills are still a problem in many communities, including ours, and increased awareness is still vitally important. However, tonight we are focusing on marijuana, and more specifically the immediate effects as well as the long-term effects that smoking marijuana has on the brain, the body, and more. With the legalization of marijuana in the news almost every single day, and many states legalizing it, most are under the impression that marijuana is a drug that is, because it is legal, is safe. Our panel of experts, which are here tonight, are here to expose the truth behind this myth as well as others. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, marijuana use most affects learning, memory, coordination, and judgment. When smoked, marijuana's effects begin immediately. Over the last 3 years, the Sheriff's Department has seen more marijuana-related arrests than heroin and methamphetamines combined, and particularly in the youth ages of 11 to 17, with over 318 arrests. This is an issue that needs to be addressed before it is too late, before more bad decisions are made, and before drug takes a turn for the worse. The city, the Santa Clarita Valley Sheriff's Station, our local school districts are all working together to combat this issue, raise community awareness and education, and bring our parents and youth into this discussion. We also work very closely with other local agencies that offer addiction and treatment support services, and you'll hear from those partners as well tonight. By knowing the signs of drug use, informing yourself and others, being proactive in the lives of your friends, children, family, and neighbors, we can all help prevent the use of marijuana in our younger community members. Tonight you will hear directly from those who are on the front lines of our fight against drug abuse. You'll hear about enforcement, treatment, the reality of teen drug use, and sobering facts from our medical community. Our goal is to provide information on the reality and the threats of marijuana use on the still developing teenage brain. Following the panel presentations, there will be a question and answer session, so start thinking about those questions. In order to answer as many questions as possible, we're going to ask you to write them down on a 3x5 index card and provide those to the staff that are walking around. And if I can get the staff members to raise their hands so you know who they are, that would be great. You have also received a survey to fill out tonight. This information will be used to gather information that will help us with future outreach efforts. And I really ask, I know that oftentimes we all get surveys at the end of things and we kind of leave them on the seats or we throw them away or we take them with us. This is very important. It's not often that we have such a broad, diverse group of community members in one place. And this really does help us know what is going on in the community so that we can shape these future efforts and we can bring in partners such as the ones you have here to make these meaningful programs. So I ask that you fill those out and turn those into staff members on your way out. Out of respect for everybody's time, this evening's event will end at 8:30 p.m., but all of the panelists have graciously agreed to stay till about 9 o'clock. If you have questions that we don't get to or you want to ask them a private question that you don't necessarily feel as comfortable with. So before we get started, I do want to say, please think about questions. We usually spend about 20, 30 minutes at the end of these symposiums because there are a lot of good questions. All of the panelists are experts in their fields. It's rare that we have this many people sitting at one table that really can answer such a plethora of questions or give you such a good, rounded information base. So we ask that you do those, that you do bring those up so we can coordinate them. If we get 40 or 50, it's going to take for a while for us to kind of coordinate them. So go ahead and raise those up as we're going throughout. So with that, we're going to get started with tonight's panel discussion. The first presentation we're going to hear tonight is from our local Sheriff's Department, and I'd like to introduce to you our Sheriff, or our Santa Clarita Police Chief, Captain Roosevelt Johnson from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. I'd like to start off by basically saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here. It's really refreshing to see as many people, both parents and kids, in one place. And it's also refreshing to have a city that's not afraid to talk about these issues. I've worked 25 years on the Sheriff's Department, and over the course of that time, I've worked in some cities. A lot of cities throughout the county and throughout this country turned a blind eye to some of the things that we're talking about in this room. And it's quite refreshing to have a city manager and a council that takes the forefront, and we all come out and talk about this. As the city manager said, I am Captain Roosevelt Johnson, the captain here at Santa Clarita Valley Sheriff Station. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today on the issue of marijuana among teens here in the Santa Clarita Valley. With all the recent discussion among states such as Washington and Colorado changing their stance, in essence, legalizing the use of marijuana, I want to be perfectly clear. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is not in favor of such actions in this state, county, nor in the city of Santa Clarita. Marijuana is viewed as a gateway drug. I know that you've heard this term used before, so let me define it a little bit. Most marijuana users begin with this drug and often transition to other drugs such as methamphetamine and heroin and cocaine. All of these drugs are illegal, and because of their addictive properties, present serious concerns for both the user and their families. That is why the City of Santa Clarita has partnered with the Sheriff's Department, created the Juvenile Intervention Team, partnered with the Hart School District, medical professionals, and other nonprofits to educate the community about the dangers of drugs through seminars such as this one and Pills Kills. The University of Michigan published a report in the National Institute on Drug Abuse entitled Drug Facts, High School and Youth Trends. In 2014, the University of Michigan surveyed over 41,000 students from over 377 public and private schools, students in the 8th, 10th, and 12th grades. 36% of 8th graders said marijuana was easy to get, and 81% of 12th graders said marijuana was easy to get. While these numbers are not specific to Santa Clarita, it is something that parents need to know and continue to monitor while they're monitoring the activity of their children. In California, possession of less than 1 ounce of marijuana is an infraction. That means that you're going to get a citation. Possession of more than 1 ounce is a misdemeanor, while possession of sales for marijuana is actually a felony anywhere in this state. What are we seeing here in Santa Clarita? Our young people are using concentrated cannabis. They're basically using, this is wax and or oil. I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer. This item is being smoked in electronic cigarettes. We're also seeing more heroin addicts mixing stimulants, such as methamphetamine and cocaine with marijuana use. Santa Clarita Valley deputies arrested over 90 people for drugs in the month of June alone. I am happy to say the good news is only 2 of those were juveniles. This is a positive sign that the intervention programs that we have implemented here in the community are actually working. I want to ask you to continue to partner with us as a Sheriff's Department in your city to make sure that we're doing everything possible to keep this community safe. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Marckley, and I've worked in the addiction field since 1978, which sounds kind of strange. I'm 55. I started doing this when I was 18 professionally. Got clean and sober at 16. So I was a teenager in the midst of this, and the marijuana that I smoked comparatively to what anybody can have access today, it's not even the same drug. Easily 30 times stronger than what I smoked. So if you think about that, if any of you come from my era, the marijuana you smoked, you would smoke 30 joints to their 1. Now it is even be higher than that. Now, Cary and the doc next door is going to say more about that. What I want to focus on is the idea of what happens when you become a teenager, this journey of being an adolescent, you begin to figure out where you fit in life. You look for a place to connect, bond, and kind of build an identity. At 12 years old, I was a big kid. I've been this big since I was 12. I was shaving when I was 12, so I hung out with the older kids. The older kids were smoking marijuana, so at 12, I started smoking marijuana. And I was that kid that had a good lung capacity, so, the big bong load I could take and hold, I got accolades for. So I began, my status in my peer group was all so associated to smoking weed and being that kid that could handle more than the average guy. Whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything else, when you're developing that place in your status in school, whether it's junior high or high school, and marijuana becomes the vehicle. It's how I made friends. If you wanted to smoke with me, we'd be friends. It becomes, I don't like to use the word crutch lightly, but it really becomes a crutch where I'm not developing the social skills to introduce myself. I'm encouraging you to be like me and smoke. So the idea of how that affects the young people in this room, those that aren't here that probably need to be here, is really more what I want to talk about. Because inevitably, when you're a teenager, you're going to congregate. You're going to want to not hang out with mom and dad on the weekends. You want to go with your buddies. You're going to want to do things. And marijuana as that vehicle to sit around in a circle, pass the joint, which was more what we did back in the day versus a bong load today, or whatever that may be, what does it signify in who you become? It doesn't have substance. To my knowledge, there's no Olympics for the guy that can hold the biggest bong load, right? What's that going to get you, But that'll get me. So the idea that we have to do something with our peer group, the idea that you have to, as parents, believe that it's not just recreational. As the brain is being developed, it is a whole different animal than a 30-year-old that started smoking marijuana. When your brain's being formed and you're developing decision-making aspects to who you are, and all that's interrupted, you're in trouble. So what I wanted to focus on tonight is simply the idea that if we don't start developing what we call alternative peer groups, APGs, it's something that I invest a lot of time and train people to be a part of, that are driven by youth. Whether it's through a church, whether it's through the Boys and Girls Club or Action or a Light of Hope or whatever it might be, there has to be a place. Defiant tries to do that. That's a really important thing. For those of you that are here from Defiant, I applaud what that's trying to do, because where are you going to fit in? You're going to fit in somewhere. And how does it become cool to be the guy that says, I'm straight edge, I'm not going to do that, I have my identity, I'm successful at what I'm doing, not just being that guy that could hold his weed in his lungs like I could. So my hope for tonight is that, number one, as you listen to the statistics of what's being smoked, that is not the same drug from the 70s and even the early 80s. It's a whole different animal. You think about this, it's kind of bizarre. As I was taking some notes, if you look at marijuana use when I was a kid, it was a drug. Until 1974, it was a felony. Should our prisons be full of teenagers on drugs? No. But that now it's touted as the cure-all. In the 80s and then into the 90s, I remember the first time I did a speaking engagement in school, it was in the Valley, and I had a kid raise his hand and say, I don't do drugs, I just smoke weed. And now you talk to a kid, they say, I smoke marijuana and it cures me. So we went from it being a drug to it not being drug to now it's a cure-all. Now, simultaneously to that, its potency's just gone up and up and up and up. So it's kind of ironic. It should be the other way around, but it's become that. So I hope law enforcement in California makes a stand from a legalizing standpoint. Quite frankly, I don't have a lot of hope in the long run. The tide seems to almost been turned. But whether it's alcohol abuse or marijuana abuse among the youth, it's still going to be illegal to youth no matter what. It does too much damage not to. So thank you for giving me this time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I wanted to take a quick moment to recognize a couple of people and tell you a little bit of a story as it relates to Captain Johnson's presentation. In 2010, the Sheriff's Department, in coordination with the city, created something called the J-Team. Has anyone ever heard of the J-Team, the Juvenile Intervention Team? This was a time where we were really looking at evaluating the whole process, the educational programs, the enforcement, everything we do in a community that relates to drug abuse, particularly with youth. And the Sheriff's Department came up with an idea where they were going to reallocate a number of resources and create this J-Team. And this J-Team has basically a different perspective, a different approach to drug abuse. It was a group of individuals who were focused on not just enforcement, but on treatment, on interventions, on steering people in different directions. And they really have done a tremendous job in helping numerous youth throughout this community over the last 5 years. Actually, it's about 5-year anniversary is this August. And 3 of them are here tonight, and I want to recognize them because they go above and beyond to identify issues and really help kids get back on the right path. And that's working with every single one of these providers to intervene and not just put them in jail, but to get them back on the right path. And I want to introduce Bill Velick, Bob Walksmith, and Sergeant Tim Vanderleek, who are all over here. Thank you, gentlemen. And then the next thing before I turn it over to Dr. Privett is Mr. Marckley talked about Defiant. And are there members of Defiant in the group? Are here? Do we have any Defiant members? There are a handful of you guys. Don't be bashful. Defiant's all about courage, right? So Defiant is a program called Drug-Free Youth in Town. And again, as part of the whole J-Team concept, Defiant was really a replacement for an old sheriff's program called STAR. And STAR was a program that went into the 5th grades and talked about drugs and tried to educate kids. And we spent a number of years looking at STAR and whether or not it was really reaching kids at the right age, whether it was giving them the right message, and really whether it was having that long-term impact of keeping them away from drugs. And working together with our partners, we decided that it was time to do something very much different. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to target youth at an age where we felt they were much more susceptible to drug abuse. 5th grade's a little bit early, but certainly high school is already a point where they're making decisions. And certainly in the middle schools, as they're getting ready to enter high school, is even more important. So the Defiant program started with, I think, around 600 students, somewhere around there, Ingrid. We had about 600 students from across all of the high schools participate. And one of the biggest impactful things that we did with this program is we had the high school seniors, juniors, sophomores, and freshmen act as mentors to the middle schools. So they actually go into the middle schools and set what we consider is a good example for kids and show them that there's going to be a lot of peer pressures as you go through high school, but there are people, there are leaders, there are courageous people in high school who they're working with that show them, again, a different approach and give them that courage and that role model before they get there. And again, that program started with about 600 kids, and I want to say we're up to over 1,800. So it's an amazing program, and it's something that if your kids are need to go involved in. So with that, our next speaker, it's always a pleasure to have Dr. Privett here. Dr. Privett is the emergency medicine attending physician at Henry Mayo Newhall Memorial Hospital, joins us every year and always has a very interesting perspective of seeing what comes into the medical establishment in terms of the emergency rooms and gives us some pretty good graphic details. So with that, Dr. Privett.
Thanks so much. Good evening. You know, I'm really excited to be here tonight, and as you mentioned, now I think this is our 4th or 5th year that we've been doing this. And it's a passion of mine to be able to make a difference in this community. And I'm excited to see so many of you here tonight. And more specifically, it's exciting to see that there's a lot of young members here in this audience, because you guys are the key. And it's just powerful to hear those types of numbers with Defiant. You know, we can say what we want to say. Your parents can say what they want to say. But if it comes from you among your peers, it's so much more powerful. And so I hope that you can take what we've said here tonight back to your friends, back to the groups that you associate with, and you can make a difference among your friends and among your community, among even your family. You know, the high is a lie, and drug abuse is a preventable behavior. Drug addiction is a treatable disease. Not one person is immune from drug abuse or addiction. Not one family, not one community is exempt. And I'm grateful for this opportunity that I have to be here tonight and hopefully be able to share some things on what marijuana and drugs can do to your brain physiologically and how it can change your life. I'm just going to kind of skip over some things I've said. We had a little overlap here, which is totally fine. But The good news is about drugs with recent surveys, alcohol, cigarettes, and prescription drugs have actually declined in the use among teens. What has remained steady, however, is the use of marijuana. What is of grave concern is a shift in perception that marijuana is not dangerous, and I think was just touched upon briefly here. 2009, 52% of high school seniors said that occasional marijuana was harmful. But in 2014, only 36% of high school seniors thought that it was dangerous. And that's what's scary, that the concern that this drug is harmful has declined, especially among 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And now that might be because of the legalization of marijuana for medical use and also with the increase of adult recreational use. It's hard to tell. And I think that's why I feel duty-bound to be here tonight, because as a physician, and I've seen a lot of patients who have come to the emergency room who have their medical marijuana card for reasons I'm not sure exactly why they have that. And I feel like we're kind of part of the problem, and I want to make sure that we have the record straight here, and I do my part to make sure that it's used appropriately. And that's why it's so great about this drug symposium, that we can do this for the community. I hope you take this to heart and utilize this information. I have some slides here that I wanted to kind of go through. Okay, so trying to drag a hit because a friend, a relative, or a parent says it's cool is not dangerous. You might lose more than what you have bargained for. Is it really worth the risk? In fact, interesting this weekend, Deanne Josian, she's my patient care coordinator. She works here with the EDAP and also the base hospital. How many patients did we have this weekend that came in with marijuana toxicity? 12 patients this weekend, and most of them were from Magic Mountain who became sick, altered, lethargic, dizzy from eating edibles. All teenagers, 12 patients in 2 days. So this is of grave concern, not only for the medical community, but also for the community in general. So when a person smokes marijuana, when they inhale it, it passes very quickly into the lungs and into the bloodstream. It goes directly into the brain and goes into various tissues throughout the body, and primarily into the brain. When it gets into the brain, this is kind of a homunculus of the cerebellum, and it's a kind of a description here of exactly, if you can look at it, of the main centers of the nuclei which control certain movement. Well, when you smoke marijuana, when you think about the brain is more than just our ability to think. It actually controls, and it's a command center of majority of our overall functions. And when you smoke marijuana, it gets metabolized and absorbed in specific neurons and in specific areas of the brain. And these are the main areas that are highlighted here and colored, which affect the brain. So when you smoke marijuana, it controls your bodily movement, your physical sensations. It affects what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It controls your sense of balance, your coordination. It affects your memory. It affects your ability to visualize, which is impaired as far as your balance and your coordination. It most importantly affects your centers of pleasure and reward system, and important to make proper judgments. The one thing that's the key here, if you look right here at the area of the reward system, that area is called the limbic system. There's two main parts of the limbic system, the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens, and that's what truly gets affected when you smoke marijuana. Now, when you smoke marijuana, the cells they hypersecrete and overstimulate with a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Now, that dopamine is the main neurotransmitter that gives us pleasure. So when we like to listen to music, we like to hang out with friends, we like to eat ice cream, your brain is secreting dopamine in this area, and you feel good. When you use marijuana, that gets oversecreted, and then you feel high, and it gives you sudden pleasure, but over time, that becomes unresponsive. And what you normally would find pleasure in no longer works. And that's what's concerned, because now you're looking for other type of behaviors, other type of drugs to give you that reward stimulation that you need, because it no longer works. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a great depiction and illustration of a PET scan of a brain, of what happens to you primarily in the short term of when you utilize drugs. Now this is a PET scan that does a time-lapse sequence, and if you can start up into the left-hand corner there, you can see a healthy brain just before a person ingests or inhales in marijuana. And now if you follow the brain, the yellow coloration is actually where that brain gets metabolized and absorbed. So you can see a nice, healthy brain, no yellow activity. A person inhales marijuana, you can see over a time-lapse period of approximately 5 minutes per depiction of that brain, how that marijuana gets absorbed quickly. Now, exactly where that's being metabolized is those centers that we talked about that affects our overall well-being, our memory, our balance, our coordination, our ability, our judgment, and all those are significantly impaired. And that's what you would see immediately in the short-term effect. Our senses are altered, our sense of time has changed, our mood has changed, we have impaired body movement, difficulty with thinking, problem solving, and our memory is impaired. And then, of course, after about 30 minutes to an hour, depending upon how much you've ingested or inhaled or edibles you've eaten, it affects the brain, and the brain eventually, after it gets metabolized, can go back to normal. Next slide. As far as the long-term effects go, studies are ongoing, but there is no doubt that when anybody ingests drugs, whether it be inhaled, injected, or eaten, there is structural damage to the brain that can cause long-term effects. And this is the most frustrating thing for me, because a lot of people think that marijuana does not have any long-term consequences. It does. Specifically where it's metabolized, it'll structurally change your brain if you chronically and habitually, over time, use drugs and use marijuana. We've seen long-term effects such as chronic respiratory illnesses from inhalation, but more importantly, we've seen actually a spike and an increase in mental illness. So a lot of people take marijuana just because they have anxiety, they have depression, but we've actually seen that it not only temporarily increases hallucinations and paranoia, but it also increases anxiety and depression, and among teens, it increases suicidal thoughts. This is a brain after someone has used drugs, and it kind of can show kind of the effects of long-term, what it's done to the brain. Now, this is the yellow is actually the intake of a normal, healthy brain. It shows the normal activity of a brain. And you can see, after someone who's abused drugs, stop taking drugs after 10 days. You tell me, has that brain gone back to normal? Look at the difference in the coloration of the top row, a normal, healthy, active brain. The person who's used drugs over a long period of time has got help, and good for them. They've not taken any drugs for 10 days, but look what their brain has done. It has not returned back to normal. It still has areas where does not have normal activity. The bottom row shows a drug abuser who stopped using drugs after 100 days, 3 months out. Now, the good news is that the brain has improved and some normal activity has returned back to its normal function, but it still structurally has changed. And that's the most concerning part of that. Of adults 26 or older who use marijuana before the age of 15, 62% went on to use cocaine at some point in their lives. 9% went on to use heroin at least once, and 54% made some non-medical use of mind-altering prescriptions. And that's what is the most important point here. Your brain changes, and the most important part of your brain that changes is that reward system. You no longer have enjoyment or pleasure of normal things in life, and so you move on to stronger things to get that pleasure that you need, and as was mentioned by Captain Johnson, as a gateway drug, it leads you to more risky and harmful behavior. So, I ask you again, is it worth the risk? Here's a comparison of a PET scan on the brain on the left. You can see the yellow and red activity of a normal, healthy, functioning brain. You can see a brain on the right of a person who has been addicted to drugs. You can see that that brain is not the same. So you tell me, is it worth the risk? And I hope you young people in here can see that the risk of just trying to take a drag or a hit to be cool, to hang out with their friends because that's what they do, it's not going to cause any problems. There's no way I'm going to be addicted to drugs after this. I just want to try it one time. Here, son, I don't want you to try this with your friends. You can try this with me. Let me help you experiment. It sometimes only takes one time that you experiment that leads you onto a path of a lifetime of addiction. And look what it does to your brain. So I ask you again, is it worth the risk? Which brain would you rather have? And I hope you make the right decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Privett. Our next panelist is Cary Quashen. Cary is the founder and executive director of Action Family Counseling, Parent and Teen Support. He is also the director of Behavioral Health Unit at Henry Mayo Newhall Memorial Hospital. Welcome, Cary.
Thank you. Yeah, I got so much to say about this topic. I mean, we could be here for a week, but I am going to say this. You heard what Dr. Privett said. It changes your brain. Adolescence, who knows? I'm going to ask you guys a question. What age does your kid's brain start developing? In the 20s, right? We have children that are smoking pot that is changing their brain. Let me tell you about marijuana today, just so you know. It used to be, when some of us used it, it used to be 0.3 milligrams THC. That's the drug that gets you high. It's up to 30 milligrams THC today. That's when you're smoking a bog. Edibles and oils, 80%. How many times stronger is that? It's not the same drug. Here's what happens to kids. I own treatment centers. I treat kids. I treat adults. I run psych hospitals. I see this every day. First, let me tell you about psych hospitals. We're getting people in our psychiatric units, adults, that are coming in psychotic. And the only thing showing up in their urinalysis test is THC. It's very frightening. I'm getting calls from Simi Valley Police Departments, Texas, Chicago, and everyone else saying they're seeing the same things. Don't kid yourself. This is a very dangerous drug, what's going on right now with our children. Kids, when it comes to treating somebody, I'd rather treat somebody strung out on cocaine or heroin than strung out on pot. Y'all know why? I can look at somebody on heroin saying, "You're ruining your life." Guess what they say? They say, "You're right." I could look at somebody strung out on pot saying, "You're ruining your life." Guess what they say? Huh? They can't figure it out. And here's what happens to your children. I've been dealing with your children for 30 years. They smoke a little bit of pot. It's got what you call short-term memory loss. They start forgetting stuff. Why didn't you do your homework? I forgot. Why didn't you turn in your homework? I forgot. Then they lose their motivation. I don't want to go to dance anymore. It's boring. Karate, not so good. And baseball, I don't like it anymore. They start losing their motivation. Then we have what you call longer-term memory loss, where they just start forgetting stuff and they don't really care about much. By the way, all drug abuse starts innocently. Nobody decides to grow up and want to be a drug addict. Isn't that true? When we're young, we all have what I call contracts. Follow me for a second. When I grow up, I will never be. I will never do. Remember those? I think almost everybody there is says to themselves, "I won't use drugs." What's the gateway drug? Who knows? Alcohol, cigarettes, weed. 90% of all addicts, the first thing they do is smoke a cigarette. And this is for the parents. There's only 2 reasons an adolescent would smoke a cigarette. 2, not 3. Number 1, I'll give it to you, peer pressure. The kids they think are cool over there are smoking and they want to be part of that group, right? What's the second reason? It's a learned behavior from home, parents. And here's what it says on the pack of every cigarette today. It says one of 2 things. It says smoking contains carbon monoxide. What's that? Poison. Or it says, warning, the Surgeon General has determined, doesn't say might, has determined that smoking causes, doesn't say maybe, lung cancer, emphysema, and it goes on. First thing a kid would do, hang out with his buddies. Want a cigarette? No. Contract they made. After hanging out over and over again, they get what you call desensitized. You want a cigarette? Oh, what the heck. They take their first hit. Contract just got broken. It's okay, it's only a cigarette. I'll never use weed. Here's what their friends say. It's only pot. It's not a drug. It's just a matter of time before they take a hit. They broke a contract. All the other drugs are what you call drugs of opportunity. They're just waiting. Your kids start smoking cigarettes. They start smoking pot. They drink a little alcohol. They hit a party. There's all kinds of other stuff going on. Somebody says, want this? They say no. They get a little more high. Want this? What's going on when somebody's a little drunk or high? They lose their reason to what? They lose their reason to reason. And before you know it, what the heck, I'll take one hit of that. How many times? There's a lot of people in recovery here, right? I want all the people in recovery, I'm going to take a risk. Stand up for a second. All the sober people, stand up. Stand up. Let's give them a hand first. I promise you that none of them woke up one morning and said, I'm going to get high. I'm going to use drugs. I'm going to end up in a rehab. I'm going to overdose. I'm going to see Dr. Privett at Henry Mayo for an overdose. None of them said that. All drug abuse starts innocently. And I speak all over the place, and somebody was telling me, how come we're having such an epidemic? The answer is pretty damn easy. The average American, and I'm sorry, it's not just all about pot because it all kind of commingles. The average American family spends between 2 and 10 minutes with their children, 13 and up, 12 and up. And here's how it is in most homes. How was your day? Good. How was school? It was okay. You have any homework? I've done it. Are you hungry? I ate. Isn't that the way it is? First thing your kid does when they wake up in the morning, first thing they do before they go to the bathroom, what is it? What is it? They text. They're talking to their friends on the internet, social media. Exactly. What is the last thing your kid does before they go to sleep? They check their phones. So here's the deal, parents, you really need to listen to this. We're never going to take drugs off the street. We have the most wonderful sheriff's department in the country here, the J team and everything. Yeah, really, we do. Give them a hand. But they can only do what they can do. It starts at home. So here's the deal, parents. Your kids wake up in the morning, they're with their friends. They go to school 8 hours with their friends. They come home, you got them for 2 minutes, they're with their friends until they go to sleep. We want to change drug abuse. We got to take the need away, and it starts at home. We got to make a difference in our homes. Does that make sense? We got to be there for our families. And I'll tell you what, I'm really sick and tired of parents saying to their kids, do what I say, not what I do. Be a role model for your kids. You don't want your kids to smoke cigarettes, quit smoking cigarettes. You don't want your kids drinking, quit drinking. You don't want your kids smoking weed, quit smoking weed. They know what you're doing. So hey, I can go on and on and on forever, but I will say this. It's like you said, is it worth it? If you could come with me for one day and go into my pocket and listen to the phone calls and hit the psych unit and go to the rehabs and watch the families that are destroyed from drug and alcohol abuse, I promise you, you'd quit. And for the people who hasn't, I promise you, you wouldn't. You're all worth a whole lot more than that. Treat yourselves, and remember, you only got one body. If you blow it, it's done. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cary. Cary always tells it pretty straight up, so we appreciate that. He talked about being in his pocket or listening to those phone calls. I mentioned Defy It earlier, about 6 months, probably about 9 months ago now. I had the opportunity in this room to have 300 of the Defy It kids here doing a presentation, a summit, I don't know what it's called. But I had the opportunity to kind of ask them questions. So I had 200 or 300 kids of all ages, and it was amazing to me as a father of young kids, of a 14-year-old. It was amazing to me to see these kids from all different high schools from throughout the valley talk about the impacts that drugs have had on their families, talk about the impacts that alcoholism or drugs have had on them individually, on their parents, and how that's affected them growing up. They talked about what motivated them to join Defy It, and almost all of them had a very personal story that they were willing to share with 299 other kids, most of which they didn't know, didn't go to school with, but in an open forum were willing to talk about it because it had that much of an impact on them. And a lot of them talked about, from being a very young age, seeing the things that our experts here are talking about. So I tell you, our kids we may not think our kids are watching as much as they are, but I tell you, listening to the stories of those 300 kids was certainly an eye-opening experience for me as a parent in understanding that all of my kids are definitely watching what I'm doing. So with that, we have our concluding panelist tonight, and that's Vicki Engbrecht. Vicki is the superintendent of the William S. Hart School District, which is our largest district here in the Valley with over 20,000 students. So welcome, Vicki.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you again for all being here tonight. We've been able to hear some very compelling and scary information that makes it very obvious just how dangerous marijuana use is, especially to our young people. And obviously, since your kids spend a lot of their lives at school, it really impacts their ability to take advantage of the outstanding programs that we offer. The good news is we've seen the number of drug-related incidents drop significantly over the last couple years, more than 30%. And while we don't minimize that it's an increasing problem, we credit some of the interventions that we've been able to establish, the use of community resources, and a word that I'm going to use over and over during the next couple of minutes, and that's partnerships. I think in Santa Clarita, like in no other community, you'll see the city and the hospital and Action and Light of Hope working together with the school district, and I think we're starting to make a difference here. You've heard a lot about the FIAT, that's Drug-Free Youth in Town, and this program's only been around a few years, but it coincides exactly with a 35% decrease in the number of drug-related incidents on campus. It's a club that's available on every single campus, junior high and high school, and it's not just about being drug-free, it's about leadership. And it's become a very popular and very cool club, the largest club that we have, larger than the football team, on any one of our campuses, as you heard, with almost 2,000 students. I think it's really started to change the culture on a junior high or high school campus, away from the cool kids are the ones that are smoking cigarettes or smoking weed, to no, the cool kids are the ones that have a plan for their lives and know where they're going and behave in a positive manner. We're very proud of our Defiant program, which is a partnership in the community. I'd also like to talk about our Cadre program. This stands for Comprehensive Alcohol and Drug Reduction Education. Cadre's been around for several years. It allows for parents to confidentially have their teen drug tested on a random basis. The results are confidential between the testing agency, which is Action, and the parent. So it does not trigger school discipline or law enforcement involvement. This is such a positive program because it allows parents a very early warning in some cases, but more importantly, it allows your teen to have a perfect excuse for why they have to say, no thanks, not me. You know, my parents have me in that Cadre thing, I could be drug tested tomorrow, no thanks, I'm going to turn down your invitation. So it kind of gives them an out. We have over 6,000 students across the district whose parents have voluntarily enrolled them at the beginning of the year in Cadre. I'd also like to brag about a joint venture that Cary and the school district have entered into about a year and a half ago, and this is Action Academy. It's a sober school, junior high and high school, a transition for students who were possibly in a residential treatment program, and now it's time for them to come back to their community, re-enter their schools, but it serves as a bridge to help get them ready to go back to their comprehensive school. This is probably one of 1, 2, or 3 partnerships like this that exist in the whole country, where a treatment agency partners actively with a school district to provide a sober academy. So we're very, very proud of this program, a one-of-the-kind, thanks to Action for working with us on that. And there have been a lot of success stories. The goal is for those students not to remain in the bubble, the protected bubble, but to get strong enough to be able to return to school, and that's happened in a number of cases, even though the program is still relatively new. So I just want to urge parents, have those tough conversations with your kids. I credit you for being here tonight, and thank you very much for the support that we all feel.
Thank you very much, Vicki. And I had to apologize to Vicki. I think I may have stole some of her material before she had an opportunity, so that's why they always tell me to just stick to my script, I guess. Anyway, we've got a couple of questions that you guys have turned in. Okay, we do have some more. Okay, great. So as staff is walking around, if you think of those questions, write them down now. Please, if you have a question you're not sure about asking, please ask it, because there's probably somebody else that is thinking about asking it. And while staff is walking around, I will take this opportunity to recognize a handful of people that on a daily basis are working with the kids, are working with the J team, are working with all of our partners up here. And that's the staff of the city that works so hard to put on these programs. And that's Ingrid Hardy, Janine Prado, Gerardo Cruz, Dana Silverman, Dana Abel, Al Gomez, Carrie McElroy, and Yolanda Calderon. So please give them a hand. Okay, so while they organize those and collect those, we're going to go ahead and start with our first question. And this is going to be, actually our first two questions are going to be to you, Dr. Privett. Does it make a difference on how the marijuana is ingested, whether it's smoked, vaped, ingested, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. When you inhale marijuana, it gets right into your bloodstream fairly quickly. As you ingest it, the diffusion between the lung and the bloodstream is fairly immediate and quick, and it goes right to your brain and metabolized within the first 5 minutes of inhalation. So yes, there's a big difference between vaping or inhaling marijuana versus ingesting it. And that's kind of what we've seen actually more with as far as marijuana toxicity goes. We've seen a lot of problems with teenagers who use edible marijuana because when they eat it, it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to metabolize it. You might not necessarily get that immediate rush, that immediate high. So what do? I mean, who just eats one bite of a brownie, right? And so they take another bite, nothing. They take another bite, nothing. They take another bite, and pretty soon they've ingested or equivalent to inhaled a significant amount of marijuana. And so that's kind of where we see that toxicity because they don't get that immediate high. And so yeah, there's certainly a big difference there.
Thank you very much. I think this is a great question here. What about reports of the medical benefits of marijuana for diseases such as asthma, et cetera? Are there diseases that this provides benefits for?
Yeah, great question. And I think that, you know, as a science community, we certainly are trying to do all that we can to find certain cures for different treatments and ailments out there. You know, there probably is a specific use of medical marijuana. It's an ongoing scientific research to use exactly how we can use marijuana. A lot of people thought that initially was a great drug as an anti-nausea medication. What we've seen, especially among teens and young adults, is that those who use marijuana have actually caused a new vomiting syndrome. We've seen actually a prevalence of patients who come in who cannot stop vomiting. And they have this cyclic vomiting syndrome, and one of the first questions we ask, do you use marijuana on a frequent basis? And they do. And so we've seen this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome directly related to marijuana. There's really, interesting enough, the FDA has not approved marijuana for one treatment. Medical marijuana is legalized in 8 or 9 states, but the FDA has not approved it for one specific disease. But we've also seen that it's probably has done good for cancer patients who have had intractable nausea, who hasn't responded to nausea medication. We've seen it success with cancer patients who have no appetite and who become cachectic and malnourished. For some reason, it stimulates their ability to eat. Imagine that. We've seen some people respond to asthma. We've seen some people with chronic pain. So I think it might have some use if you've tried every possible medication, you have tried every possible treatment, and you've gone down that end of the road, and there's nothing else for you, and you've exhausted all of your opportunities and treatment therapies. That would be the next step, is possible marijuana. But I've seen 18-year-old patients who have come to the emergency room, have chronic back pain, and they're on medical marijuana. They've never started with a non-steroid anti-inflammatory. They haven't even had an x-ray of their back. But they have chronic pain in their back. And unfortunately, that's where I am here tonight, because we're part of the problem. And some of these doctors need to get on board and make sure that they uphold the Hippocratic Oath.
Thank you. Okay, this next question is going to be for you, Cary. This next question is going to be for Cary. The flyer and email through the school said that marijuana affects the maturity development in teens' underdeveloped brains. Can you touch upon that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay. The flyer and the email through the school said that marijuana affects the maturity development in teens' underdeveloped brains. Can you touch upon that?
Sure, sure. And one more thing I do want to say is people are getting medical marijuana for depression, and then they're ending up in my psych unit, a lot more depressed. So we really better pay attention to that, too. When you look at teenagers, I mean, we talked about it earlier, their brains aren't even developed yet. And the part of the brain that's not developed is the decision-making part of the brain. I'm not going to use medical terms. It's the part of the brain that can't quite figure things out yet. So when kids are smoking a lot of pot, it doesn't allow them emotionally to mature and figure things out. Does that make sense? So the more the younger kids are, I'll tell you, I have an adolescent treatment center. When we get phone calls from parents and they want to admit 11 and 12 years old children for chronic pot smoking, a lot of times I won't take them. I'm going to send them to Utah for a year first till their brain catches up, because they're that emotionally addicted to marijuana. The younger the kids are, when they start smoking it, it's a frightening deal. So.
All right, thank you. Next question is for Steve. Steve, if a friend and I share a joint, is it equivalent to smoking 15 joints from the 70s? How do you know the content of the THC from the 70s?
The internet tells you everything. Did you know that? The studies I looked into, the THC level in marijuana in 1978 was 1.5%. And now it can be anywhere from 22 to 30, and you do the edibles, it can be 60 to 80% THC, so, or more. So if you take that simple math, so it's very easy to look at it as a 30 to 1 pretty conservatively. So that's where I got that information.
All right, thank you. Next question is for the captain. What are the consequences if a youth is pulled over and found to be under the influence of pot while driving? How do you test?
You know what, driving under the influence, it doesn't matter what you're driving under the influence. There's driving under the influence of drugs and or alcohol. It's still a crime. There are tests. There are field sobriety tests that are done. They're administered out in the field. There are similar tests that are done that you do use for alcohol that are used on folks that are under the influence of drugs. And most of the deputies that are out there working the field are trained to recognize the signs and symptoms of someone being under the influence of a narcotic or a controlled substance or any of those things. And they have certain symptoms that they'll look for when they're making those tests. And if you're found to be under the influence of that, they're going to take you to jail. When you get to jail, you have an opportunity to provide a urine sample to prove or disprove that you're under the influence. Once that test comes back, that's what's going to be used to determine whether or not the DA is going to prosecute you for driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
Thank you. We're going to pass the mic down to Vicki. Vicki, did the local school districts get the word out to parents regarding this symposium? And if so, how was this done? How did you get the word out?
For tonight, we have an automated system that sends emails out to the parents of our students, and that's usually the easiest way to get the news out. And I believe that's what we had done.
And if there are parents out there that didn't get the word or have better ideas of how we can communicate to make sure that you're aware, please, in your surveys, put that in there so we are aware of that. Back to you, Dr. Privett. And last time I said that it's not often that you get free medical advice, so if you have any other questions, he's here, might as well ask. So Dr. Privett, will you differentiate between THC and CBD? Does CBD have valid medical uses?
Well, that's what scientifically, that's what we study. That's basically the chemical that binds to certain receptors in the drug, and that's kind of what we're looking at. The THC is actually the compound, the chemical compound that is extracted from the marijuana. The CBD is actually the receptor and the portion of that chemical that binds to the certain parts of the brain, and that's what we're looking at. The body has normal CBD receptors throughout in the tissue and specifically in the brain, and that's why we're trying to see if there's any medical use of the marijuana because of that portion binding to those receptors. So there is a difference, yeah.
Great. Next question, we're going to go back to the captain. There's probably a lot of parents that want to know the answer to this one. What power does a parent have with an 18-year-old?
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that. You're talking about the 18-year-old, and I often go to the schools and talk to the kids upon graduation, right before they walk across that stage. And one of the comments that I make to all the students out here is that the responsibility is on them once they turn 18. They're an adult. Whereas the parents, when they're under 18, the parents will often get called. Let's say the kid gets arrested for something. The parents are actually going to get called, and the parent will also receive a citation to appear in court with that child. Once that kid turns 18, the onus is on them. They're an adult at that point. The decision-making and all the things that they're doing, it rests on them. So obviously, what's going to happen with the relationship that you have with your kid probably started a long time before your kid turned 18. And they're going to listen to you if you've had that good relationship. But we've heard some discussions on how much time parents are spending with kids. The point is, make sure that you're spending that quality time with your kids so that when you tell them something, it means what you say, and they'll listen to what you're saying.
Great. And I'm going to follow up a little bit on that, Captain, because I know that the J team has had a lot of success in some of the cases that they've dealt with in people who are over 18. So that intervention aspect that we talked about with the J team, while parents may not have the ability to physically or whatever force an 18-year-old to do it, there are intervention opportunities that parents have resources that may be able to provide an opportunity for that, right?
Absolutely. I will. Yeah, that's definitely true. Our juvenile intervention team, and I failed to mention them, and I apologize for that. Sergeant Vanderleek is here, Detective Velick, and we also have a city employee who's a former Sheriff's Department sergeant who works Narcotic Bureau, Bob Walksmith. They do a fantastic job here in the community. They work with Action, Light of Hope, and all the partners that we have here. And we've really taken a look at, this is not about the whole enforcement thing. We know we're not going to arrest our way out of this drug problem. So our goal is to try and educate the parents, educate the community, get involved with intervention efforts, and if you feel that your kid has a problem, even if the kid's over 18, reach out to one of the staff on the juvenile intervention team at the station and make sure that they know that you want to try and do an intervention in your kids' lives. We've stepped in on multiple occasions of kids over 18 that the parents have reached out to us and gotten the kids in a treatment program and gotten them on the right path. So thanks for bringing that up, Ken.
Absolutely. The next two questions I'm going to combine and come back to you, Dr. Privett. And this is, I'll read both of them, but I think they're pretty much along the same lines. Can you reiterate for us, does smoking pot make me focus better? Does it make me smarter? The second question, which is related, is how does marijuana affect athleticism or athletic performance and brain performance?
Well, I think those questions were pretty easily answered in my presentation. Where the brain is, where that drug is metabolized, those are the specific centers that affect memory, that affect bodily movement and personal senses, and those are significantly impaired with marijuana. I played college basketball, and I had a couple teammates who used to get high before a game, and you could totally tell when they were under the influence. Their decision-making was not as crisp. Yeah, they might have not have been stressed and be able to handle the pressure, and their composure might have been better, but their ability to make decisions as quickly was not the same. So without a doubt, it does not improve your memory. Without a doubt, it does not make you more athletic. There is no way that this is a sports-enhancing drug. And I can't imagine, and I hope that there is no athletes out here who would think that that would improve their athletic ability, nor do I hope that you would think as a student that this is going to help you in school. I can promise you it will not.
Great, thank you. Since you have the microphone, how many drug cases do you deal with a year?
Great question, and I was talking to Deanna, my patient care coordinator, earlier about that. We probably see right around 300 overdoses per year. We actually tried to pull the numbers before I came in, and it was so impossible that our data technician couldn't do it. We do it based upon the ICD codes that we have, and it was so large, there were so many patients, we couldn't extract that information. But we see so many various overdoses, whether it be associated with heroin. Majority of it is alcohol and prescription pills. But we've seen, the steady use of marijuana more so now than we have in the past few years because of the accessibility to edibles, and we have a lot of teenagers who are using these edibles because they think it's cool and they think they can tolerate a bite here or there. But the problem is, just like when my wife makes chocolate chip cookies, one cookie might have 5 chocolate chips, the other one might have 20. So it's very difficult to determine the amount of marijuana that you're ingesting. So,
Great. Cary, how much THC is in wax?
ooh, good question.
Well, we're finding in wax and in the oils and the edibles up to 80%. It's extremely high. And by the way, we were just talking about overdoses. I just need to throw this out. More people die in this country now from overdoses than car crashes in the last couple of years. That's extremely sad.
Let's see here. Next question.
Let me follow real quick on that with overdoses. And that's why people don't think that marijuana is that harmful, because you can't overdose on marijuana. It can't kill me, unlike prescription drugs, heroin. Those cause a decrease in your depression, and you die because you stop breathing. The problem is that it increases your risk behavior, and certainly Captain Johnson can talk about that. We've seen multiple traumas. I had a severe trauma on Saturday of a 27-year-old who was high on marijuana, who collapsed both of his lungs, fractured his neck, ruptured his spleen, and he near death. Yeah, he didn't overdose on marijuana, but he dang near killed himself because he was driving a car under the influence. So.
Okay, this I think can go for probably any of the panelists. Are you hiring social workers, ministers, chaplains? Is there any collaboration between churches and agencies going on? I'll defer to the panel on who wants to answer that.
I think that's a great question, and the answer is yes. I know that Action and Light of Hope both do our best to try to collaborate. From my vantage point, the more support a young person can have, the better off they are. So, and we were blessed to live in a valley where there's a lot of churches that really are relative in our families' lives. So there's lots of activities and support. So yes, we try to coordinate with churches. As social workers go, I think the Family and Child Center, we definitely have coordinated with them. They do some of their own treatment through there, but we also coordinate with them. Our offices are in the same building that has the Domestic Violence Center and the Single Mothers Outreach. I had one of their LCSWs, licensed clinical social worker, in my office today talking to her. So yes, we try to collaborate, yeah.
From the Sheriff's Department's perspective, we definitely partner with all of the groups here in the community. I do meet with the Interfaith Council here in the community and make sure that we are on the same page in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here. It's all part of what we're talking about, the prevention and the intervention, making sure that we're doing what we have to do. In addition to that, Within the last 9 months, I met with the Department of Children and Family Services, and we have on-site, on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, a social worker from the Department of Children and Family Services. So yes, to answer your question, we are partnering with the social workers.
Great, thank you. Vicki, we're going to go all the way back down to you here. What are your disciplinary actions for students who are caught with marijuana on campus?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just like one of the panelists was explaining that the laws related to drug use have changed, so have the way that the schools have been dealing with it. If you're caught selling marijuana on campus, that puts you in a different category, and you're going to be looking at a recommendation for expulsion from the school district. That's for sales. But for being under the influence, for simple possession on campus, it's changed over the years. And now it's more about intervening immediately and getting the student and the family hooked up with the appropriate resources that hopefully can change the behavior. That's not to say that we've thrown zero tolerance out the window. We still have zero tolerance for drugs or being under the influence on campus, but that zero tolerance doesn't necessarily mean an expulsion for every student that gets caught under the influence. We have a program called TIDE, which is Training in Drug Education, and this is a diversion program where the student is excluded from school for a few days, and they go to an education program, and that has shown a lot of effectiveness. So hopefully working with the families, getting them connected to resources. We use other means of correction when possible. If it's a repeat offense, of course, it kicks us into a different category with a possible discipline transfer to a different school or stricter penalties.
Okay, thank you. This, any one of you guys can take this if you'd like. What would you say to those people that say at least marijuana is not as bad as alcohol?
You know, alcohol is not as bad as heroin, and crystal meth not as bad as this. Who cares? It's all bad. All drug abuse starts innocently, period. And I'll tell you what, maybe not everybody that smokes a joint will end up shooting heroin, but almost every heroin addict that I ever met smoked weed first.
Okay, thank you, Cary. Okay, since we're right next to Dr. Privett, I guess that free medical advice, we got a lot of it here.
I need to open a clinic.
Okay, here we go. How does marijuana and most drugs of choice affect ADHD, ADH, and high-functioning autistic brain?
You know, there's actually been some great studies associated with ADHD, and that's a whole new conversation because I think all of us adults in here all had ADHD when we were kids, but none of us were on medications, right? And we've just seen, an increase in pediatrics and adolescents on multiple medications, including medications for ADHD. And there has actually been shown success among kids who have failed other options to have benefited from the use of marijuana. And they've actually shown an increase in the activity level of autistic kids using the CBD and the marijuana. So there is a huge potential there. And so, like I said, there are some possible use of marijuana, and that's what we're trying to determine when and it's appropriate, when it's not. And in a case like an autistic child, I think whatever we possibly can do to improve their quality of life, it might have some benefit.
Okay.
I'd like to add, the marijuana is fat soluble, which means it's not something you can urinate out or sweat out like you would a normal drug. Alcohol you can drink, in a short period of time it's gone, but marijuana builds up in the fatty tissues of your body. And so that's a whole different game. So you may not die from marijuana, but the impairment lasts a lot longer, and the altered course, something Cary said, I hope you really listened to it, he would rather work with somebody who's on a harder drug because you can show them reality and they connect the dot that it's a problem. You can be on marijuana and you don't realize how off course in life you have become until it sometimes you're 5, 10 years behind the curve of your peers. You're still living in your mom's house at 25, thinking life's good, listening to AC/DC, and all your friends are married and buying homes and doing things, and he just was a failure to launch. Well, if you look underneath why he was a failure to launch, he's been smoking weed since he was 15. So those are things that affect the quality of life differently than some overt thing that alcohol would cause. So.
All right. Okay, Dr. Privett, is marijuana used by youth or adults to self-medicate for bipolar disorder?
Is marijuana appropriate to self-medicate for bipolar disorder?
Is it used, correct?
And I think we talked about that, and Cary can tell you all about it. Like, we've seen a huge increase, actually, in worsening mental illness for patients who try to use marijuana for depression and anxiety. In fact, we've seen an increase in schizophrenic-like symptoms with paranoia and hallucinations and suicide. So you would think that if they're trying to use that because of depression, we've seen it certainly in the emergency room and in BHU, an increase of patients who have attempted to use that for their mental illness has made their mental illness worse.
Okay. This next question, I think, relates to the slides you were showing here. On the scan results of the brain, how much usage was there to show the differences on the brain? Can you define that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that you guys appreciated the change in coloration. When some of those slides, one of them used a discoloration of yellow and red to show a normal active brain, and someone who was under the influence of drug, you saw that a significant decrease in that coloration. I hope you can appreciate that. So there's no doubt, as was mentioned, when you use drugs, it structurally changes your tissue because it's fat soluble, and it affects different parts of the body, and it definitely changes anatomically the structure of an immature and developing brain. And definitely in teens, and that's been the hot debate on the internet, is if medical marijuana in general really affects cognition, and it hasn't affected adults per se as much as in teens because the brain is still developing, and that's the key because it structurally changes a developing brain. Once the brain is developed, it doesn't have as profound effects anatomically and structurally as it would on a immature brain.
Okay, still with you here. How are doctors regulated to write prescriptions for marijuana? The writer says that they feel like
and
it's so
I think that's
accessible.
probably the big problem. That's probably something that we need to look at. We had a huge problem of doctors who were just pill pushers, and we have addressed that. And in fact, even here in California, the DEA has initiated what's called a cures system, where when you come into the emergency room, we can actually log into the DEA website, and I can pull out your whole narcotic prescription history in the last 6 months. And so I can determine whether you're doctor shopping or you're drug seeking just by on your behavior. And if you come in and say the things that you say correctly, I have to medical legally treat your pain. Or else nowadays it's all about customer service. It doesn't really care how good of a doctor you are. It's all about how good your customer service was, and I did what you wanted me to do, unfortunately. But if you come in and you have pain and say the right things, I got to take you for face value. I just met you. I really think you're having pain. It's objective. It's hard to assess the reality of it. But I can see your behavior, and if there's any questionable behavior, we can modify that.
Okay, let's see here. Do urine tests that are sold over the counter, are they 100% accurate?
Nothing's 100% accurate ever, but some of the tests right now are really pretty darn good. But for parents, if you're going to test your kids, don't buy marijuana THC test. Buy 10-panel test that tests for everything. Because if they realize you're testing for pot, they're going to use other drugs. And I get calls every day from a mom or dad, and here's what they say: guess what I found under my kid's bed? And I'll go, urine? And they'll go, how did you know? So if you're going to test your kids, you really got to be on top of it. And remember this: when your kids say, go ahead, test me, test them. Usually that means they're dirty. And I'll tell you what, don't give them a chance to think about it. Everybody, when they wake up, has to go to the bathroom. The best time to test somebody is right when they wake up. If they say they can't, they're lying.
And that's a good question, because there are different things that we can take over the counter that can make a urine test be falsely positive. So just be aware of that before you come down with a hatchet. Marijuana, no, but there are some other things like PCP, like a simple Benadryl can give you a positive PCP test on a urine drug screen. So,
Or a bunch of bagels.
yeah, or a bunch. Yeah, that's true too. Poppy, yeah, if you eat a lot of poppy seed bagels, you can come positive for opioids in your urine drug screen. So just make sure you're aware of that.
Okay, Dr. Privett, are people...
And just real quickly, guys, you can always call Action. We will test your kids anytime for nothing. It'll be supervised, so you don't have to be the probation officer in your home.
Dr. Privett, are people, I think you may have touched on this, are people in their 30s and 40s, are their brains affected the same as younger adults?
Yeah, they're not, and that's why there's a discrepancy, and I think that's why there's a huge propaganda on the internet trying to support that marijuana really is not that dangerous, because there's a lot of adult users who are highly functional, highly successful, and that's why we're focusing here tonight, because we can make a difference among a developing brain, among teenagers, to make the right decisions now.
We're going to come down to the captain here, and I think this is one of the challenges I think you probably deal with. Two questions worded somewhat differently, but basically, why are pipes, bongs sold in Santa Clarita, and how do you justify the sale of paraphernalia in Santa Clarita Valley?
You know what, they're, obviously there's paraphernalia that's out there, and it's actually for sale. This has been something that's been going on for quite a long time. We're not necessarily saying that we're trying to justify the sale of those, but just the mere possession of a bong is not necessarily illegal. Okay, other drug paraphernalia used to smoke cocaine or methamphetamine and things of those natures, those things are actually regulated and they're illegal under the Health and Safety Code. But because it's not necessarily the bong in terms of the marijuana, and that's what it's used for, that's why it's sold here and that's why it's regulated. I did want to add one thing, though, and talk to you guys a little bit about, we talked about marijuana being the gateway drug. The one thing that I did not bring up to you, in November of last year, Proposition 47 passed. And what most people don't realize is possession of methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin were all classified as felonies. And what that meant was if we arrested someone for possession of those drugs, it gave us an opportunity to use as a hammer the action and all the other programs to get this person into a rehabilitation program. What we're seeing today since that proposition passed, all of those crimes are actually misdemeanors. So deputies are making those arrests for those particular crimes, and before they can get their report written, the person's cited out and walking out of the front door. So we don't have the ability to basically utilize the resources that we have in terms of the rehab and all the other things. We're not seeing people working with us as much. Now, the sheriff and other law enforcement folks are working diligently to try and get some of those things changed, but it was sold as a measure to the voters, and the voters voted on this, that it was going to be something where more money would be funneled into the communities to get folks into rehab. I can tell you for a fact we haven't seen that money pumped into the program. So while we're talking about marijuana, I'm telling you that marijuana is a gateway drug, and we see it, most people that use heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine as that. Right now, it's actually a misdemeanor when you get arrested for those things.
Thank you, and I will go a little further on that and say, while we have not seen any money roll into the community to help with that, we certainly have seen an increase in Part 1 crimes, which are things such as burglaries and robberies, which are a direct result of drug abuse. Captain, while you have the mic, I'm going to ask you a couple different questions here. There is a legal limit for blood alcohol content. Is there anything similar for marijuana, or is it just zero tolerance?
You know what, it's zero tolerance for drugs when you're talking about drugs in your system, any drug in your system when you're talking about driving. The thing that most people don't realize too, though, it's any level of alcohol for a minor in your system is illegal to drive. So while that .08 limit that's out there, that's actually for someone that's of legal age, it's illegal for any minor to have any drugs in their system or alcohol in their system driving a car.
What are some of the different names of marijuana on the street?
That's a pretty good question, but I'm actually going to defer that question to Bill Velick if he's around, because Bill is actually on hand and he's the one that's on the ground.
All right. Come on down.
I've been waiting to throw this mic to you, Bill.
Yeah. The street terms change all the time. You know, weed, dope, marijuana, reefer. If you're hearing a term and you don't know what it is, the best thing you can do is get online, type it in. Urban Dictionary will tell you what it means. All the terms mean different things in different states. So there is no simple answer to that. It's just, if you hear something, I always tell parents, Urban Dictionary, type it in, and it'll tell you what it means for a ton of different things, and you can figure it out. Because there's new names every week. Every group of kids that come into high school, junior high, all make up their own names, and it changes sometimes weekly.
Yeah. Sure.
There's a term called 420. 420 is, it's so funny because marijuana, like we've been smoking marijuana forever, nobody even knows what 420 is supposed to be. But when I was in school as an addiction counselor in the early 80s, there were 420 known chemicals in marijuana. That's where the term 420 originated. But it's Adolf Hitler's birthday, so kids do that. 420 is the day to smoke pot. If you don't know this, parents, you want to drug test your kid, drug test them on 421. Because seriously, a good pothead wakes up at 4:20 in the morning and smokes, and make sure he smokes every day at 4:20 in the afternoon, and on April the 20th, you do it all day. And so 420, just for the record, came from there being 420 known chemicals in marijuana. So that's what that's about, too. So.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Privett, what negative impact does vaping have on bodies? And that's regular vaping, not with THC.
Yeah, a great question, and that's another of grave concern in the medical community, that people think that vaping is not that big of a deal. It's a huge deal. In fact, if you were to get that concentrated nicotine on your skin, you can get severe nicotine toxicity if that were to break. You know, we haven't yet to see, certainly using a vape has decreased the other chemicals associated with smoking, and I think right now it's pretty early because that's a new type of use of nicotine, but I think in the next 1 or 2 years, we're probably going to see some complications associated with that. We haven't seen the significant respiratory problems with it, but we have seen an increase in nicotine toxicity. So, yeah, it has been shown, it's done better as the acute lung issues. Only time will tell. I think it still shows some chronic problems with it.
And a lot of the new data on that is showing that the vaping is actually is actually drawing younger people
Younger
into.
crowd. That's the concern, is that the increased use in teenagers using this nicotine product as thinking that it's safe and it's not as harmful as smoking, but it's just as dangerous.
And this is something that the City Council will be looking at this fall in terms of regulating it just like regular tobacco products. Let's see here. Here's another question for you, Dr. Privett. What about secondhand smoke? I assume marijuana smoke.
I mean, just like the risk of cancer with secondhand smoke with cigarettes, there is an increased risk of secondhand smoke with marijuana, including toxicity and it affecting your brain just like as if you were to do it primarily yourself. So definitely there is a risk of secondhand marijuana use.
Thank you. Let's see here. Captain Johnson, what does the law say about those who smoke marijuana and those who sell it? What is legal and what is illegal?
Smoking marijuana, that goes back to what I talked to you about in terms of simple possession. Simple possession of marijuana less than an ounce is actually an infraction, and that's less than 28.5 grams of marijuana. Anything more than that in terms of possession of marijuana, over an ounce of marijuana, is actually a misdemeanor crime. But sales of marijuana of any level is actually a felony.
Great, thank you. Cary, there's a two-part question. I'll answer the first one for you. Where can I access the information presented tonight? And that'll all be on the city's website. The second part of that is, what is the best way to get my youth tested for marijuana?
Call me. Real simple. Call 1-800-367-8336, and we will test them anytime. It's free of charge. Also, if you're in the school district, you can join the, what's it called? The cadre program. We do the testing for that, and they'll be randomly tested through the district.
Cary, why don't you take this one as well? How do you recommend getting a young adult off marijuana? She has been told that it's medicinal and it helps calm her down. I see her going downhill.
Okay, people don't change until they absolutely have to, not till they want to. So until the consequences of what they're doing outweighs the payoff or fun that they think they're having, they're going to continue to do that. There's a girl in one of the groups that I deal with. She's 22 years old, right? I don't deal with her, I deal with her mom. She comes to one of our support groups to get stronger. The kid comes home, eats, leaves for 3 days, comes home, and calls her mother from upstairs at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and says, "Can I have some breakfast?" And mom's bringing it to her. Why should this kid ever change? People aren't going to change till they have to change. And if we wait for them to hit bottom, we got big problems. I have a phone full of messages. You want to hear them? There's 30 people on this phone calling me because their kids, family members are dead. So we don't wait for people to hit bottom. Do an intervention. Step in between them and the negative behavior any way you can, and don't enable. That, by the way, that if I throw them out, if I take a hard stand, they're going to use more, is ridiculous.
Okay, I think this next question was pretty well covered by the panelists. Are there any studies about long-term effects of cannabis? But I think the next two questions are something you maybe can address a little more. What if I smoked 30 or 40 days ago, and are there any therapies that are available to repair early damage?
If you smoked 3 or 4 days ago,
No,
what?
30 to 40 years ago, I'm sorry, not days, 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, 30 or 40 years ago, I imagine. Well, you want to answer that? That's kind of a. If you think you're having a problem emotionally or psychologically, get some help. Look into it. But otherwise, if you've been clean and sober for 30 or 40 years, you're probably in good shape.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is the last question. We're going to end with you, Dr. Privett. If marijuana is a controlled substance for medical purposes, why don't real pharmacies distribute it as opposed to these little clinics such as those at Venice Beach?
You know, I wish I had the answer to that question because the majority of physicians, especially emergency medicine physicians, are very frustrated with these doctor-in-the-box shops who just pass out, you know, these prescriptions, be able to have medical marijuana. I don't know the real answer. It's a very complex question. It's very complicated. It has a lot to do with healthcare. A lot of physicians get burned out because it's difficult to make a living with the medical legal environment that we practice in, and it's easy money. I'll be quite honest, you show up, you say the right things, for $400 you get a card. You see, you know, 10 patients a day, that's pretty good money. And unfortunately, you know, if we can steer and educate the proper way and try to regulate it, we're not going to, you know, make a difference. And I hope that the medical community will do their part, and that's why I'm here tonight. Just real quick, I wanted to talk about this long-term marijuana use. I found a quote in the study that I had. There's 3 main studies that talk about chronic marijuana use, and whether it's going to increase my athletic ability, my academic achievements. Chronic marijuana use compared to non-users have been shown that they have a lower life satisfaction, they have poorer mental health, poorer physical health, more relationship problems. Users also report less academic and career success. Marijuana use is linked to a higher likelihood of dropping out of school, and it's also linked to more job absences, accidents, and injuries. So there's no way that there is any type of benefit to using marijuana. Unless you're at the end of the road, you have cancer, you have a severely autistic child, and there's no other options, I would recommend using medical marijuana.
That's great. And as I mentioned tonight, there are several people, in addition to the panelists, who participate in these drug programs and so forth, and help the city and the community put together programs and make sure that we're addressing the community's needs. And there's a handful of community leaders who come together to focus on drugs and alcohol and on this committee. That's the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And I know we have a couple of members, so if we can have them just raise their hands so we can acknowledge you. And thank you for your work on the Blue Ribbon Task Force as well. So as I mentioned earlier, the experts will stay around. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so the experts will stay around if we didn't get to your question. But I do want to thank all of the panelists once more for being here tonight, and the City Council for making this all possible. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. And again, for more information on what we're going to be doing next, please go to heroinkills.org and follow Heroin Kills SCV on Facebook. And with that, thank you and have a great night. Thank you.